Hello and welcome to In Pursuit Of. My guest is Kanika Sinha, who is the convener of Commutiny, the youth collective. So welcome, Kanika.
Thank you.
Can you share an example of a youth-led initiative that had tremendous impact and absolutely took you by surprise?
Yeah, and this one's the story of this girl called Preetam from Chandauli in Uttar Pradesh. It's, sort of remote area, very, very sort of stuck in their own social norms, and, girls have particular roles and all of that. And so we ran a program there called Jabardast Jagrik. So this was about young people, identifying issues in their communities that they wanted to act on. And they were mentored and they were supported, and there were grassroots organizations in all of these locations that would do that for them. And so, for her, the thing that really kind of stuck with her and said, I want to work on was menstrual hygiene and health and hygiene, because women in her village essentially would have to step out at the dead of night to dispose of their sanitary napkins. But it wasn't something you could do in daylight. It was just not okay to do it. And of course, then and so consider the health and hygiene risks there, and completely unsafe. And so, that's how it started. And so, of course, she and Asha, two of them, would be talking to young girls about practices and all of that. What has stayed with me is she started the conversations at home and with her father. And if you can imagine, this is not a conversation you have with your father in that kind of a setting, in most settings actually.
Absolutely.
Where he helped her build a clay incinerator to be able to dispose sanitary napkins safely. Those incinerators went into other homes, they went into the school, so it was something that became a conversation. And so that shifts a norm, right? So it's not just them talking to 30 other girls and sensitizing and building awareness, but to then say what you've been able to move in your own home, and then you've taken it to other homes. For every incinerator that
and
went
not
into
just for other women, but for men to take responsibility of this and say that, this is a part of us.
So for every home that then had an incinerator, that it was out in the open. Women have their periods. Women need to dispose their napkins, and it was okay.
Unbelievable.
And for it to be happening in Chandauli, and these two young girls, under 18 actually at that time. Yeah.
Wow, that's really something. So tell me something that in your work, how do you ensure inclusion across caste, gender, different cultures within India itself, different backgrounds, economic backgrounds?
So one is that, like I said, we're a coalition. So there's organizations working in about 21 different states in all kinds of settings. So representation of young people, whether they're rural, tribal, religious minorities, sexual minorities, urban young people, semi-urban, all of that, so there's representation like that.
Right.
The other thing that by design one tries to include, like the Samjhota program I told you about, is wherever possible, how diverse can that cohort be safely also, right? So also for some young people where the vulnerabilities are high, you need to create, you need to do those cohorts much more safely and maybe a little more closed. But where possible, actually make sure that the composition then brings that representation, because then those conversations and that dialogue and that experience and the friendships and sometimes the love that blossom, I would say, the advantage that there is a geographic spread, the advantage that there is, different sorts of communities get represented. I think that's there for us in the coalition. Folks from Assam are interacting with young people in Tamil Nadu, and these Jagriks were everywhere, and they were talking to each other and saying, oh, I've done this and I've done this. And, so there's also just the strength of the coalition that we're able to rely on.
Right. So I'm trying to understand, when you say the coalition, how many people are in it? How many young people are part of it? They all identify themselves as part of Commutiny, or the organizations as part of Commutiny? How does it work?
So this is a coalition of organizations, most of whom work with young people, right? Some are advisors and allies in other ways and contribute to youth leadership development. But most of these are organizations that have their own identities, and they're doing super work as, very deep, powerful work as organizations in their own right. They are in the coalition, I think, because they believe very firmly and strongly that this idea of every youth a Jagrik and every space nurturing Jagrik is something that resonates with them, that more and more young people need to be given spaces and more enabling experiences need to be created for young people's leadership to thrive. So they are part of this coalition. One organization is not going to be able to solve it. So when you come together and you respond to these meta crises or polycrises in a sort of through collaborative action, there are more chances of us being able to do better, right? So that's also why they come together.
If there's an example of collaborative action,
yeah,
what would that be?
I want to talk about Saath Nirbhar, which is a campaign that we did sort of during COVID. So the health crisis, as that kept escalating, whether it was oxygen or thermometers or whatever people needed in terms of healthcare packages, all of that was, sort of going out. In the first phase, we were sort of all doing this on our own and tapping into each other and helping each other wherever we could. But I think there was the sense that, we're a coalition of 100 plus, 150 organizations, not really reaching our potential. What are we doing? Something's missing. And we sort of came together and spoke to each other, just created spaces also just to be with each other. There was so much, it was also a well-being thing, right? And I think that's where we kind of landed into. Everyone's talking about what we need to do on the ground, saving lives, and no one is accepting and acknowledging that this is also a well-being crisis,
right?
That we also need to work on that. And we need to work on that with the young people because they are on the front lines. The first people who got out there were young people, right? And yet, and so they're out there, you're dealing with all the trauma of that, but you're also dealing with isolation, you're also dealing with anxiety, you're also dealing with hopelessness. And I think just that conversation, and that's why we call it Varta Leap. It's a conversation that leads to a leap that got us to say, in this relief work that we're doing, we need to bring in this recovery piece around well-being. And we started some well-being interventions. So as a coalition, again, we set up labs, we designed interventions that were around preventive well-being, around community building, creating social hope. And these well-being interventions, along with the relief work that was going on, so food packages, health packages, but also well-being interventions. So communities were coming together and focusing on, their inner selves, and so were young people. And I think that just shifted how we were feeling at that point and what our narrative was. And we had to call it Saath Nirbhar because there was so much conversation about Atmanirbhar. And we said, but if we don't recognize that we are interdependent, we will feel as lost as the world is feeling right now. And the second we can see that actually we're all like joined at the hip, it changes how we see the world.
Right.
And so I think Saath Nirbhar was really a turning point for that. So of course, we managed to raise a lot of money and resources that when we're able to go to the right places. It was always a cross-sectoral coalition, but I think in that moment, organizations that sort of had access to funds, organizations that were able to deploy those funds, like everything just, came together because I think a narrative that just made sense to everyone got co-created and tied us together.
Wow, that's very nice, actually. I mean, it's possibly for you, I don't know, have you seen that kind of Saath Nirbhar interdependence like at any other point of time, or that was like really?
I think crises is when these things really show up. Right. So I think and become most apparent. But I think that remains sort of the underlying spirit of who we are. So we do it together because we can't do it alone.
Good, nice. Okay, so my question to you is that what is your take on intergenerational collaboration, and how do you get the elderly and the youth to collaborate and create change?
Yeah. So I think the entire framing of our work, like when we say young people's leadership, is based on the premise that there is a role for adults and elders to play in that, right? Like we were saying is that, if you just throw young people and say, ab kar lo, leaders ban jao, nahi hone wala hai. So there's a very crucial role for adults to play as enablers and as allies. In fact, there's a framing of what we call youth duties and rights, which came up again, this idea that young people will lead nation building, young people will transform India, will lead us into $1 trillion economy. That's the big thing. And so for that, young people need to take leadership, but for that, young people have the right to take decisions. That needs to be created and enabled. But for that, young people need safe spaces to explore themselves and discover who they are, like the Samjhoto-like experiences.
Right.
Young people should volunteer and create social change, but young people should also have the right to have livelihood options of connected to their own aspirations. So this whole, sort of interlinkage between, we call them, like I said, the duties and rights framework, but that's what it was. It is, what is the role that then the elderly, the adults, the elders will play to enable young people to, say, do their duties, if that's what you want to call it. And so it is all a collaboration. There is, I think there's a lot more maybe that needs to happen in terms of getting young people, and we do that a lot in Varta Leap. So Varta Leap is, of course, as a community of practitioners also, we're quite intergenerational. There's many young youth workers also there, but also representation of young people. So the Jagriks that we work with as well. And it's not always easy because there is this generation gap that comes into play. There's a lot of lingo. There's so many things that culturally also we've got to, make work together. But I think what the fifth space enables is when you say, okay, I do this with openness. I do this without the fear of judgment. I can take risks here. Then it's a fifth space for the adults as well. It's a fifth space for young people as well. And when that happens, then actual dialoguing can happen. You respect the wisdom of experience, but you respect the wisdom of young people and what they're bringing. And I think just that sort of helps people thrive. It's a challenge. It's not always easy.
Kanika, tell me, what kind of metrics matter the most? I think in the social sector, people struggle with kind of measuring abstract results, right?
Yeah.
So in youth development, what kind of metrics would matter the most?
So, it's a really tough one, Aparna, because it isn't, youth development itself is longitudinal. It's something that goes on, right? So the markers, I would say, and so there are very few metrics. I would say there are, of course, pre and post sort of assessments that you can do to say, okay, how much has a young person moved, say, in terms of awareness, in terms of some skills, in terms of the action they are taking, and there are lots of tools that can be used to assess some of those things. But broadly, it is how, things like the confidence in taking their own decisions, how they use their ecosystem to be able to do that, how they interact, what are the kind of relationships they're able to build, what is it that they are, how are they, and in a sense, their own resilience, right? So there is, it's like, how do you define what agency is? So we say agency, we say life skills, so all of these are sort of categories that people can comprehend. But when you think of markers, they're so subjective, right? So for us, really, we talk of this sort of pipeline of youth leadership. And I know I've used the word Jagrik so many times, but we do love it. So indulge me.
It's a lovely word.
But, the idea that a young person can move from one level of leadership to the next if they are guided and supported through it, right? So It's not just by chance. A lot of social entrepreneurs, a lot of young social change makers become change makers by chance, which means they have also had to fight to get there. They're fighting parents to say, no, this is the kind of work I want to do. They're fighting society to say, listen to me, I have an idea. So there's a lot of sort of jaddo-jahad they have to do to get where they are getting. How do we make that easier, right? And then we're saying, so I'm also connecting it to the metrics and the markers in a way, which is that if a young person is first just given options and opportunities to jump in to understand what the world is and how you can interact with the world, and that you can make a difference, to start developing this belief in yourself. That's just who a Jagrik is, right? It's like, I can believe. The next level is when you start building sort of ownership and you start seeing yourself as, when I said Jabardast Jagrik, is you're saying that, okay, there's more I can do. I can lead some action now. I have the ecosystem support that I need. I have the confidence, and I'll build the relationships that I need to make this happen. And so there's sort of higher ownership and action that you're able to take. And then there is what we call the lifelong leaders, or the Jeevan Jagriks, who are people who've said that this is what I can do for life, and being able to sustain yourself and build resilience, so well-being, your own resilience, institutions, organizations, if that's what you've chosen to build, or community resilience. That's how you see youth leadership kind of evolve right through.
How do you deal with funders when this is so complex?
Yeah.
Just putting down your impact numbers, etc. How would you then do that? Enough funders want it to be measured, and they want a timeline for it, right? Then how do you deal with that?
So the good thing is that enough funders also understand this. Thankfully, I think things are changing. And I'm really happy to say that, and very, very grateful and respectful of the philanthropic ecosystem that is really working hard to evolve itself. So I also feel like when we talk to a lot of funders, they understand their limitations and they're trying to shift that, because I think there has been a recognition that these short-term gains are not taking us very far, right? So of course, some things can be very easily measured, like FLN needs to be easily measured, and school enrollments, and these are all needed, right?
Absolutely.
Health-related things needed, very, very desperately needed, and they can be measured. There are some things that really cannot. How do you measure community resilience? What is it, But for funders who are really in it for the long haul, and I think are committed to it, we're being able to more and more, finding more allies there. At the same time, we do recognize that we need to build something. So there are so for instance, life skills, have now metrics around it, right? Because they can be delivered through school, and it's easier to measure and school itself becomes a space where you can longitudinally not just work with young people, but also then measure.
Right.
So I think in many spaces, the social sector is also, recognizing that need and is working towards that, and working with funders, working with, sort of people who work in the area of MEL and impact and all, to develop those things. And on the other hand, there are funders who are understanding more and more that, ecosystems, belongingness, resilience, these are things that matter for social change, and it's okay to invest your money and be patient with it. Like I said, we do have measures. I think each of our programs has, a before and after kind of situation, quantitative as well as qualitative. But I think where there are funders whose needs are different, you've got to just go a different way. I think when we need to be able to see together, and if that's not happening, I think it's okay. Right. So that's how we've gone about it so far.
Well, it's really nice to know that there are enough funders who are, open to the non-measured. So, Kanika, what is your vision for youth leadership in the next decade? Youth leadership in India for the next decade.
So I'm hoping that more than anything, the narrative around young people shifts. This demographic dividend narrative shifts to like what we like to call a demographic multiplier. It's great, you have this bulge, but can we sow what it will take for the world and young people to thrive instead of just thinking of what we can extract? It's also been really personal, Aparna. Like I've been, I entered the sector as a young professional. My volunteering experience kind of prompted me to say, this is what I wanted to do. I didn't know where I was going before that, everything from hotel management to counseling, and I, thought of everything. And landing here kind of, it's been home, but it's been a place where I have just grown and thrived. And it began because as a young person, I landed up at the right place. And I really just hope that young people land up at the right place, whatever that is for them. Find folks who really care about them and want to invest in them, nurture them, mentor them, and find the wherewithal to say, yeah, I'm going to experiment, I'm going to do things differently, and life's going to be okay. I hope spaces can be accessed and young people can be set up like that. And I'm very hopeful about the world that young people will shape.
Wow, nice. Maybe there's hope that they will actually emerge really unbiased and more inclusive and more collaborative than their elders have been. really,
Yes.
right? So
Yes,
that's the hope
absolutely.
for tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank
Such
you.
a pleasure having you here. And really, I think your work is so powerful. Working with young people it's really special, I think. Thanks.
Thank you.
I like the idea that developing youth is not just about what they are going to do for our country, but it's a lot to do with how they need to thrive, how they need to be happy and find their own space and find who they are, and the rest is going to follow. So keep watching In Pursuit of.